All right, welcome everybody. Yep, I'll take this. So if you haven't filled this out, just please do so at the end. I'm Todd from MAC here. Welcome to alcohol training. Very, very important. As you may know, that this is something that we take very seriously, and we require everyone that's going to deal with alcohol, whether it's in the arena, the ballparks, to be a part of at least once a year. You need to sign in so you get credit for this, and then we take note. We have a special little thing we do. There is, a 10-page questionnaire test after this, so make sure you're ready and take copious notes, so that's all good too. So, but Jason from St. Cloud PD is here, and I'll get out of the way and let him do his thing.
Thanks everyone for coming. How many people have done this training before? Show of hands. Okay, so a lot of you, that's good. So as you can imagine, it'll be a lot of the same information, but for the new people, it'll be a good way just to kind of get an understanding of what we look at from the law enforcement point of view, but then obviously as a city, because you guys are part of the city. So
there's a still chair up here. You got 2 more people coming.
So, as you guys can imagine, the point of this training is to keep everyone safe, right? Keep the people that come to partake at the events here, to keep them safe, make sure that they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, but then also to keep the business, but then you guys as the servers, free of liability and getting in trouble, right? Or just maybe your own conscience, knowing that you did the right thing. So it's pretty obvious with having, you guys are going to be, I would imagine everything will be on sale liquor. Obviously, there's no off sale liquor. So your guys' a lot of your job is going to be to make sure that the person you're dealing with is A, of age, and then B, they're not so intoxicated they shouldn't be consuming anymore, right? So this is going to be important so that you guys have a good understanding of that. It's good that you guys, if you do notice someone that is going to be, you feel like they shouldn't have anymore, trying to see if they have someone that's with them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but working on that as we go. So I'm not sure if anyone has ever been to or drove by. I don't know if we have any firefighters, paramedics here, or people that have come across a DWI crash. I have, and it's, as you can imagine, this is the extreme end of it, but nevertheless, you see a lot of maimed people and injured people, and it's not fun to see. So, and I say that more so to kind of get you guys to realize that your guys are kind of that front end, right? You're the ones that are going to be curbing possible outcomes. So just to keep that in mind, when you're not sure if you should serve anyone, there's no harm on erring on the side of caution, right? Making sure that you can go home and sleep knowing that you didn't overserve someone that shouldn't be. So, and this slide shows the point of, just because it's a DWI and someone gets injured, not everyone dies, but people survive and they have lifelong consequences or lifelong struggles because of it. So every 30 minutes or so, there's someone who kills someone in a crash, and then every 2 minutes they get injured. So this is something that happens still way too much in our society, especially in this community where we have so many opportunities for sober drivers. Uber, Lyft, our cab services, friends, families. So obviously, these stats are a little bit old, but it gives you at least a starting point or a reference to what it's going to cost, or what it costs our society with this. So in 2011, there was 136 deaths, roughly $191 million, and then it's about $1.5 million per death. This is, as you can imagine, factors in costs of medical costs, insurance costs, replacing things if it's structure, of roads, if it's family upheaval. These are all kind of what figures into it, and you can imagine that, I would imagine anyone would love to have their family member back and not have to go through this process, right? So, as you can see, the cost of a DWI is quite expensive. I'm not going to have a show of hands of who's had a DWI, but I'm sure everyone here has had a family member or a friend or an acquaintance, a coworker that has had a DWI, and if you've talked to them about it, it's not fun, right? It's night in jail, a couple of nights in jails depending on the circumstances. It's their vehicle potentially getting towed. It's the court process. It's then having the interlock system, which isn't free. And not to mention the dependent on the level of DWI, because there's 4 different levels. The higher you go up, the more hoops you have to jump through and the more it costs. It's going to be something that can drastically affect your lifestyle. Obviously, you could get fired from your job, depending on what your job is. If you're someone that does a lot of driving for your job, if you lose your license, it's kind of hard to do your job, right? So you could get fired. Not to mention if it's something where you miss too many days of work, you could get laid off. So these are all things that factor into it. And then the insurance costs. We all know insurance companies do everything they can to raise your premiums. So this is a perfect example of how they do that. And rightly so. So these are all factors of DWIs. And the obvious alternative, right, is getting a sober cab, as I talked about before. So for $20, $50, whatever it costs you, depending on where you live, that's a lot less of price to pay than dealing with going through the DWI process. So ultimately, about 2/3 of the time when you're dealing with the DWI, it's the driver that is the one that dies. Often you'll hear of DWI crashes. The ones that are obviously very saddening are it's where the driver survives and the person that they hit. I have a coworker that her brother-in-law, they got hit by a DWI driver and lost his wife and one of their children. So I mean, everyone knows someone. I've heard stories about that. So it's saddening that this stuff still happens nowadays, especially in our community. So roughly there's about 30,000 DWIs arrests every year in Minnesota. Predominantly they're males, probably because males are more stubborn. 1/3 of them, 1/3 of Minnesotans, or not 1/3, 1/7, 1 of 7 Minnesotans have a DWI in their record. And predominantly it's the 20 to 35-year-old range that get the DWIs with that. And people under 21 years old can get 1/10 of the DWIs as well, which is too high and which is kind of surprising since they shouldn't be drinking at all. So ultimately, with 6 million Minnesotans currently, approximately 400 die in car crashes a year, which is way too many people for our state. So on Friday nights, Friday or Saturday nights, if you're not someone that frequents the downtown area, we have to do bar close in St. Cloud, and there are a lot of drunk people, and unfortunately, they make bad decisions which get us involved. So with that being said, our concern is that if at least 1 of 7, which I would say more, people that leave a bar are impaired, it obviously has dire consequences and people make bad decisions in that. And luckily with you guys here, You shouldn't really have that much of a problem with over-intoxicated people, but nevertheless, it's a huge problem so that they don't go driving out and hurt someone else. So, as I said before, there's 4 different charges of DWI, and ultimately, as you can see, the lowest charge, the misdemeanor, most likely it'll cost you a night in jail and roughly $1,000, give or take, not including other costs, which would be like your insurance, your tow fees, etc. And then as each level goes up, it goes farther and farther up. And usually if someone has a felony level, they'll definitely be getting some jail time with that, not to mention potentially not getting their driver's license back at all. So as you can see, this isn't a fun experience, and if it's something that you need to drive to get to work, it makes it very difficult to do that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of the civil issues that can happen for the business, but then also the servers, right? So it can be, can be a fine. The business can lose their license for a period of time, and then if it happens too many times, it can be revoked. Fortunately, in St. Cloud, we don't have too many, as you'll see, too many 3rd or 4th violations. Most of the time it's 1 or 2, and then the business figures it out, I guess, that they need to do a better job of training their staff. So as you can see, the first violation is a fine, retraining of all staff so that everyone's on the same page of what they're supposed to be doing and what they're supposed to be looking for. And then a suspension of the license, the liquor license for that business, and then ultimately that business is put on probation for a few years so that they doesn't re-happen. So as you can see with the second violation, the fine goes up, the suspension length gets longer, the probation period stays the same. And then, as I said before, the 3rd and 4th we don't really have. We're fortunate that it doesn't happen too often in St. Cloud. Not that I'm aware of any since I've been here. The fine will go up on the 3rd violation, suspension gets longer, probation gets longer, and then the 4th is revocation of the liquor license. So, like I said, we don't really have those. Fortunately, it's our businesses do a good job of teaching their employees and making sure that they're adhering to the rules and what they're supposed to be doing. So as I kind of talked about, the civil liability part of it is, as a server, if you overserve someone or you clearly see that they shouldn't have any more, you serve them, and then they go out in the community and something happens. Either they get in a crash, which shouldn't happen in the wintertime, or in the summertime, but if it was winter, walking out and they stumble, fall, and pass out and they freeze to death, you could potentially be liable as the server, not to mention the owner of the establishment, the city, or the county. So those are all things. That's why, not to make you paranoid, but you should use your common sense when you're interacting with people and making sure that you're not just saying, oh, that'll be fine, right? So, then this just shows the newspaper clippings of different instances of places being sued or potentially held liable for over-serving. This is an article from the Star Trib talking about a guy that bought some beer from a store and then passed out and died. And obviously it was wintertime, so fortunately, hopefully, I know it is Minnesota, but hopefully you guys won't have that issue where it gets too cold. So, potential violations is selling, as we talked about, selling to someone that they shouldn't be having any alcohol. And as a cop, obviously, we get trained on the signs of DWIs to help enforce DWI laws. But we practice, we have training where we actually see people in person, and then we measure their level of intoxication, so we have an understanding of what the signs correlate to potential level of DWI or intoxication. And so for you guys, some of the signs, as we've all either seen it in person, most likely is, just the general odor of alcohol, the slurred speech, the swaying as they're standing, fumbling with stuff if they can't pick up things, can't hold things properly, not be able to formulate sentences, or when talking to you, it takes forever for them to answer a simple question. So, and then on the other side, the other column, the more extreme ends where someone becomes, belligerent, argues, wants to fight, maybe urinates themselves, things like that. Like I said, hopefully it won't get to that point, but you guys might see the left column more so, and those are all things that I would imagine everyone has either seen in person before and kind of know what to expect. So, and then refusing sales, it's just like anything. It's customer service in the sense that you have to try to just do your best to sell it. Explain to the person, hey, I've seen that you've had, it seems like you've had, a little bit too much to drink, and I just don't want anything bad to happen. I don't want you to get hurt or something. And ultimately, I would imagine most people are like, okay, whatever, that's fine. They might be mad and say, whatever, I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. And ultimately, that's not on you, as long as they're not driving, which we always, if you do see someone getting in a car that you feel is drunk, please call us. But if they just stomp out, that's fine. If they get upset, you all have a boss, right? I'm sure there's a manager that you can talk to. So that's what I would do, is talk to them, and then they can deal with it. And if that still doesn't work, then they can call us and we can deal with it. But ultimately, don't ever hesitate to cut someone off just because you're scared that they're gonna get upset with you, right? That's their problem, not yours. And you, like I said, you have to go home and sleep at night knowing that you did the right thing, okay? The other thing too is to make sure that, which I would imagine, that everyone's on the same page. I'm sure there's probably bars or restaurants where one server might say, I'm going to cut you off, and then some other guy is like, oh, I know this guy, he's fine. That is where, when they start undermining you, it can make it very difficult. But I don't imagine that to be the problem here, but just make sure that everyone's on the same page too, which, like I said, you guys are all here, so I'm sure that's not going to be an issue. But so, as talked about, refusing anyone alcohol because of their level of intoxication, what you feel like they've had too much. But then even the having proper identification. As we all know, you go to Applebee's and their whole thing is, if you're under 45, we're going to ID you. And it's like, seriously, I got 2 kids here. I don't look 21. But nevertheless, they do it to cover themselves, so there's no harm in you guys doing the same thing. If you aren't sure, we all probably know someone that is 20, but they have a nice beard and they look like they're 35. So there's people out there that look older than they really are, and there's people out there that look younger than they are. So there's no harm in asking for that ID and covering your bases. If they don't have it, they don't have it, and that's on them. Nowadays, you pretty much get ID'd at every place you go to, so don't feel bad if you have to refuse them. That's not your problem, that's theirs. If they get upset, talk to your boss, and I'm sure your boss will back you and be like, well, you need to have an ID. But if they can't go 2 hours without a beer during a baseball game, which can be hard, then they should just go home. So ultimately, as it talks about just different ways of kind of diverting that person's being upset with you, you know, if it's something, you know, as it says, offer them some kind of food or a pop or something instead. Obviously talking about them discouraging the drive home, and then like I said, if you notice that they are intoxicated and you saw them drive here, you know, there's no harm in saying, hey, how are you getting home? And they're like, oh, I got a cab, perfect. If they say, I'm driving, then, you know, I would definitely keep an eye on them and then let us know as well so that we can assist if they do drive. And then the last point of the, you know, you see in movies and TV shows, someone's drunk, let's give them some coffee and they'll be fine. That's not the case. All you have then is a drunk person who is really caffeinated, and that doesn't really solve the issue of their impairment. So as you guys, the only thing that you guys can do is the time part of it. So the longer that the time takes, the longer time that they haven't drank, that's when they'll finally start to sober up and do a better job of being able to function. So don't give them coffee or an energy drink, it won't help. Ultimately, as we talked before, is you guys do this training so you're better aware, but also to cover your butts, to cover your boss's butts, to cover the city's butt. So do everything you can to make sure that you're, like I said, not overselling to people that are drunk, if they don't have IDs, and trying to help prevent someone making a bad decision and driving home. So as you guys can read, they ultimately, it's unlawful to serve anyone under 21, no matter what, out in public. So that person's going to need some kind of photo ID to have with them. And I'm sure you've seen, I know I have, I've seen DLs where it's been in a guy's wallet forever and it's so dirty that I can't even tell the photo of the person. So if you get one and you're looking at it and you're going, I can't tell who this is, then I would consider that in disrepair and ultimately not an appropriate form of ID. So don't hesitate to say, listen, man, I can't see this photo, you know. I can't tell who this is, so I can't take it. When it comes to fake IDs, nowadays they're pretty hard to duplicate, and there's so many. If anyone has, especially with the real IDs, but if anyone has any of the newer ones, I think the birth date is lifted up a little bit, so you can feel the numbers on them. There's the holograms that are in there. I think it's a loon, if I remember right. So all IDs it's pretty foolproof. You can tell right away when they're fakes. As said before, I mean, if you feel like it's a fake ID, I would ask you to keep it, because it wouldn't be uncommon for that person then just to leave here and go somewhere else and try it on someone else who doesn't pay attention or who doesn't care or whatever. So you have every right, as you'll see in the next slide, is you have every right to seize the ID. Obviously, ideally, we would like you to call us as soon as possible so that we can talk to that person and figure out how they got it, but then also have a conversation with them about having it and possibly giving them some kind of citation for the fake ID. So please don't hesitate. And if that person, because we've had it happen downtown where someone takes an ID and the patron's upset that they got their ID taken, and they call us and say, yeah, we took their ID, but they're still here because they're adamant that it's their ID. That's great. We'll come, we'll look at the ID. We can run it through the Minnesota driver's license website, and we can compare and make sure that everything's legitimate. So don't ever hesitate to take someone's ID if you think it's fake. Because if it isn't fake, they're going to stay there. They're not going to leave, right? I mean, no one's going to leave their ID here if it's a real one. Obviously, I think goes without saying is the photo doesn't match the person. I mean, we've had it happen where someone borrows their sister's who's older, or a brother, or they borrowed a friend of theirs that's older. I mean, if it doesn't match the photo, it doesn't match the photo, you don't serve them. It's all the liabilities on you guys. So if you don't think it matches them, then don't serve them. If that person's that upset, they'll leave, or they'll call us and we can deal with it. But ultimately, don't hesitate to err on the side of caution. So as we talked about, as I said, is you can seize that form of ID. It says that you're supposed to call us in 24 hours, but most businesses or situations I've ever heard of, the business calls us usually within a couple hours of it happening. So just make sure, obviously, if you do seize one, let your boss know, and then they can deal with it. So compliance checks. The people that have been here before have probably been privy to a compliance check, but all it is that what we do, we have officers that go out through the community. We have people that are usually between 18 and 20 that come out with us, and then that person goes in, tries to purchase alcohol, and we just try to see if you guys serve them or not. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. These people don't, as it says, we don't put makeup on them or a beard on them so they look like they're 35 to try to fool anyone. I mean, it's just the person is who they are. So it's pretty straightforward, and like I said, we don't have too many violations. Every year we have maybe 2 or 3, but all it is, I mean, ultimately you guys just have to remember is if the person looks too young, ID them. It covers your bases. So, and they'll never have a fake ID. So they'll won't, if they ask for the ID and they don't have it, then you don't serve them. So it's pretty easy. As we talked about, each state has their different IDs. I mean, each have their own safeguards. So ultimately, some states might have holograms, some might have the raised numbers like we do, but at the end of the day, if you're not confident that it's a legit ID, by all means, keep it and give us a call. Like I said, if it is a legitimate ID, someone's not going to leave without it because that's their form of ID. So they're not going to leave if it is truly them and it's a proper ID. So for different IDs that you can use, any U.S. driver's license, any tribal ID, any Canadian ID, any military ID. The only one I wouldn't use is I've had, like at SCSU, we have students that are from different countries and they have their own country's ID. Those aren't acceptable, but if they have a passport from their respective countries, those would be okay. But not a driver's license, just because their standards of protecting the ID from forgery is sometimes not be as good as ours. So if it's a person that doesn't have a U.S. or Canadian or tribal or ID, then I would definitely ask for a passport. And passports, I mean, are pretty easy to determine if they're real or not. So as you can see the different examples, I think this slide's older though, because as we all know with the real ID, things have changed a little bit, but you can tell, as I said, the different safeguards that we have on the IDs. It's pretty straightforward. So just some examples of the Canadian IDs, and then your military IDs, the passports, and then your tribal IDs. There are pamphlets you can get from like the state of Minnesota. You can go online if you want, and they can send you a booklet of different IDs and what their safeguards are on their IDs, so you have a better idea. But We don't even use them really anymore because the IDs change so much of what they're using for safeguards. As the years go on, they become more elaborate, so it's kind of common sense, really. So, as we talked about before, is when you are checking the IDs, you know, making sure that the photo matches, which is kind of common sense. Make sure that they have the proper, their age is appropriate. And on the Minnesota ones, it'll tell you, it has the date on there when they are 18 or when they are 21. So it should be pretty easy to notice right away if that person's of age. And as we talked about before, just the general appearance of it. You know, if it's really dirty and you can barely see the name or barely see the photo, if the photo doesn't match, etc. I mean, you guys are smart enough to know that when something doesn't look right, you'll catch your eye. So, and then it says not an expired card. I don't know. Obviously, with the COVID situation, people weren't able to get them as easily. So that part, it'll be up to your bosses. But I mean, if someone's out a couple months, I don't know. It's not as big of a deal as long as, from my point of view, as long as everything else matches. I think the main part is if the photo and the name and the ID was legitimate a few months ago. That's the main part of it. And then if someone has got their ID clipped, for us, it's easy to figure out if it's a legitimate driver's license. But for you guys, if they have it clipped, they should have a yellow form, a yellow piece of paper with it. So as if they went to the DMV, got their address changed, got married or something, changed their name, they should have the yellow form, and they're told to keep that yellow form with them until their other new ID comes. So if they don't have the yellow one, that's their problem. They know they need to keep it, so it's just an excuse. Ultimately, yeah, in Minnesota, obviously you gotta have a whole face shot. Unfortunately, people are still able to wear hats and whatnot, which it is what it is. But ultimately, they will have a full face shot. And then on the back, it can say there's alcohol restrictions, and that's more so for DWIs. So if we run someone's driver's license, it'll have a restriction in a use of alcohol, which usually means they've had previous DWIs. And so even if they're not over the legal limit and they have alcohol, we can take their license from them. But for you guys, that doesn't really apply. I mean, if they're not driving, then it's irrelevant. So ultimately, if the person's drunk or you think they've had too much to drink, refuse them. Obviously, if they look underage or they are underage, and you know they're underage, or you know that they don't have ID, then refuse them. If the person is really intoxicated, there's no harm in just telling them, hey, you can't be here, you're too drunk, just go home, or can I call you a ride to come pick you up? It happens, and if that person is really impaired and they're planning to drive, try to distract them. So as we talked before, try to get them to get a ride here, or get someone to pick them up, ask to call a ride for them. So try to prevent them as best as you can. We're not asking you to fight with someone, and that's not appropriate, but do your best to try to distract them from driving. And if they do drive, call us right away, give us a license plate, give us the type of vehicle, color, anything distinguishing about the vehicle. That's so important. Nothing's more frustrating than someone calling in a drunk driver and they say, yeah, it's a black sedan. Okay. Try to get a license plate, try to give us as much information so that if we pulled that person over, we have a solid details of that vehicle. So And then obviously just you guys do your part of making sure everyone's safe and enjoying their summers. So, any questions, comments, concerns? Everyone's awake? Okay. Thank you guys. Anything, Todd?
No, I mean, the biggest thing is just to reiterate, if in doubt, card. If in doubt, card. If in doubt, card. It's been a while, but the MAC has been stung, over the last 20-some years by one of these things, and it's embarrassing, one, and we do not want it to happen. We can't control a few things, but what we can control is who's buying alcohol and who isn't. So just check the ID. It's not, nowadays it's just, 20 years ago when this all kind of started, it was harder to ask for IDs, and it wasn't as, now it's rather, like you say, if you don't have your ID on you, it just doesn't happen very often. Everybody's expected that, so don't be afraid. Scott, I don't want to speak for you, but Scott does not want to sell one more beer to somebody that might be at that age, that's not good, or has had too many. None of us want that, so please just be very, very cautious what you're doing. That's really about it. It's just very important what we're doing here, and we appreciate Jason coming today. But if you have any questions at all, the pamphlets and the materials, I don't know what we can do as far as getting updated stuff, but I'll try to work with Scott. We'll get some updated stuff, what's good. But the real ID is pretty self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
Can kids get the real IDs or just adults?
No, it's just adults.
Okay, so if there's a real ID, that's a good sign. It's good. All the younger under 20 are colored, so that helps too. But we'll get a whole picture thing for you all to look at that's colored. That'll help too. So, but if you have any questions, now's the time to do it. But it's we appreciate taking the time out. We appreciate everybody taking the time out. Make sure you fill that sheet before you go, and then that's it. Okay, I'm good.
So Scott, we're still at the rocks. We're still carding everybody because I noticed a few people kind of getting a little too easy on that at the end of the season. And then it was embarrassing at the concession stand when they come up and say I didn't have a problem.
I think we follow the officers, lead on that, like we talked about Applebee's. I'm a firm believer if you're in a situation like you mentioned with 2 kids coming in, you look 40 or under, let's do it. Todd mentioned that everybody's got their IDs. Now if somebody that's 60, you put your hand on the Bible that that person's over 21. I mean, I think that's probably over the top. But
Yeah, I agree.
Our
I agree, because there's times when I've been with my grandparents and I'm like, seriously? I mean, this person is clearly many years over 21. So yeah, like you said, I think like you said, use common sense. I mean, everyone here, I would, for the most part, say, yeah, you look under 45, so you're going to get ID. But there's no harm. So.
Yeah, I think if you're in doubt at all, card.
Right.
If you think you're absolutely sure that person, he or she is over 21, then you should be good.
So we did have someone from Brazil last year, but she did look like she was at least in her 30s. So kind of with what you were saying.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
not sure, but
yeah, I mean, if you're, I would say that some of those, I mean, some people just look older. So, I mean, ultimately, if she doesn't have an ID, I mean, her country might be different, but I think here.
yeah, we had to look at it very carefully. The print was
The ID or
very
passport?
small. We didn't think about asking a passport.
Okay,
We just had it looked like a regular driver's license, but the print was so small.
right,
It actually, and you had to kind of like check both sides,
Right.
because I think the birth date was on the back side too, and it
Yep.
was,
Yeah, they're different.
No.
So I would never trust a foreign driver's license.
so she didn't look like a college student, she just.
Right. Yeah.
Was somebody visiting from
Yep.
out of state or out of.
Country. Yep. Oh, so close. Any other questions?
Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.